Hey guys, my name's Jillian Hind, and I'm a recruiter at Square. So I've been in talent for about 5 years now. So I'm still a newbie in the talent game, but I've done everything from building diversity pipelines, managing diversity programs, university programs. And now I also lead the TEDx St. Louis division, which has a very large women's event every year. So I'm pretty involved, and I've been pretty involved with women's initiatives just throughout my career. And then now I've brought that into Square. So I recruit at Square now. And specifically for the women's groups, I lead our St. Louis division of our women's groups for Square.
Awesome. Thank you. Vicki.
Yes, I'll be glad to go next. I'm Vicki Wheeler. I lead operations and physician sales and engagement for Accredo. I've been, so Accredo Pharmacy is, in case you don't know, is a specialty pharmacy with Express Scripts, now part of the Cigna family. I've been with the company a little over 20 years and had the pleasure of helping to start the first ERG at Express Scripts, which was our women's ERG, which is about 7 years ago.
Wow. I can't believe it's been that long. All right, thank you. And Emily, I know you're out there.
I am. Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Brazel. I'm the Employee Communications Director for BJC. I will tell you, I miss Andrea desperately. She and I partnered on a lot of things together at BJC, and she is very missed. And you guys are very fortunate to have her leading your organization. So in my role, so Vicki mentioned they formed the first ERG with the women's group. Our women's group was actually the last one that we formed. I was involved in helping to create our ERG program. We call them connections. We call them BJC connections. And we formed a lot of other groups, and we kind of saved the women's for the last. We are around 75, I think, percent, going on 80% women at BJC Healthcare. So we're kind of the majority in that sense, but it's one of those things as you start kind of looking up the ladder and looking at the executive levels and stuff, there's definitely opportunity to grow those numbers. But because we had such a large bolus of women, we did save that one for last. And it was an opportunity for me, whereas I was able to help start the overall program. By the time we got to the Women's Connection, that was the one I wanted to lead. So I was very excited to jump on that. And Andrea was a member of our Women's Steering Committee as well.
Great. Thank you, Emily. You know what, Emily, if we can continue down the path, can you help describe, I was part of the journey at BJC of, from our first connections group to then, having 8 of them and, one of our final ones being women. But can you kind of share the journey of why the employee resource groups and a little bit about like how they got started?
Sure. So, it's kind of an interesting story. So we have 15 different hospitals and many what we call service organizations all across kind of the broader metro area, out in Columbia and Farmington. And we really didn't have any groups that came together cross-functionally. And where this actually started was many years ago as Veterans Day was approaching. And we were thinking about, it would be really nice if we celebrated our veterans across the system rather than everybody doing things their own way in the hospitals. Mm-hmm. And so we tried that. We tried having every hospital kind of do something similar for Veterans Day, and we kind of brought everybody together in a few different locations, and that kind of spawned the whole idea of, hey, this would be really cool if we started having these groups come together. And there were many of us who had come from other organizations who were familiar with employee resource groups. And that was kind of the catalyst for change. We decided, you know what, we are not taking a formal approach this first year. Let's just see if people are interested. So, my favorite thing to do is get people together. And we threw some happy hours and said, hey, anybody who's an LGBT team member or wants to show their support to the LGBT community at BJC, we're going to have this little reception one night. Come on by if you're interested. we wound up with this huge turnout. And so we started asking questions. Well, would you be interested in forming a community, coming together, and supporting each other and kind of getting the word out across the organization? And it was really interesting. And it's interesting looking back at it's only been like maybe 5 or 6 years since we started that initial Veterans Day, and just how quickly things have snowballed. There was just a lot of interest in connecting across all of our hospitals together.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. And I think the journey, fairly similar at Express Scripts, but Vicki, if you could share, because I think on the flip side, if you will, at Express Scripts, the women's group was one of the first to start. Is that right?
So women's group was the first ERG we formed. And the reason we went after the women's group is because our base of employees at the time were 70% women. But when you looked at leadership positions, director and up, you were in the 16, 17% women. And so we really felt like that was something that we needed to address. And we thought the ERG could help us in doing that by understand the needs of our female employees, take in feedback, be able to provide education and training and learning modules to help them, but then also help leaders to help their employees to get the experience they need to promote up and be successful in the organization. And so that was really the genesis of why we went after the women's ERG first.
Awesome. So hold that thought, because I'll be excited to find out what that percentage looks like today.
Okay.
And Jillian, tell me about the journey at your organization and where the women's group fits in.
So the women's group is one of our core groups that was established, but we've built upon that because now we've got religious community groups. We've of course got an LGBTQ community group, but the women's group has just been strong and steady. It's one of our largest representations. Clearly, is most people we have and it's intersectional too. So whether or not you are an ally or you are a woman, you can be a part of this group.
Awesome. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about allies. That's a word that we've been throwing around quite a bit, but it's still a fairly new word to us. How do you get that ally participation, and who are those allies?
Yeah, so we actually just had a male leadership group. Now this is a stretch, right? It's square, so it's a little will I call it risky, maybe innovative, brave, but we had a panelist of men who wanted to be allies, right? And these are all men in leadership positions, asking women how they can make Square a better place to work for women. I've seen it done incorrectly. I've seen it done where there's a panel of allies and it's them telling women how to be successful in the workplace. But truthfully, that's not the way to do it. This needs to be this group of men asking questions for, women to feel safe, comfortable, ready to be outgoing and ask for what they need, or they're creating a safe space. So I think truthfully, we actually help men be better leaders, of the women on their teams.
I love that. That's awesome. Vicki, Emily, anything to add as it relates to allies?
I mean, I love that approach. I think that's right. That is definitely one of the things that we set out to tackle. And once we started to have the discussions, we were surprised at the number of men who wanted to join our women's ERG, who said, you know what, you're right. I want to be part of that. I want to help. I want to learn. I don't know what I don't know. Help me. And that was a pleasant surprise for us.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's one of the things that we're focused on really with all of our connection groups. And we're thinking, next year that's going to be, instead of just continuing to add groups, that's really something we want to focus on, to how do we get more people involved in supporting the communities.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about structure. I do want to talk about some of the great things that you've done. But, like anything else, right? I'll use the phrase, it takes a village, right? Everybody has day jobs and everybody has a lot going on. So how did you structure your groups such that you're able to really tackle some of the things that you've been able to do? Start with anyone.
This is Emily. I'll go ahead and start with that. One of the things that we did, and again, going back to this being such a large population, before we launched the group, we started with our female directors and above, and we got that group together really a few times that year to kind of talk about, if we were to do this, what would this look like? Who would lead it? How would we be involved? How would we structure? What would our goals be? And so we really spent a lot of dedicated time figuring those pieces out and getting ready for the structure. And where we landed with that is forming a steering committee, which Andrea was part of our steering committee, of some people from that group who raised their hand and said, you know what, this is really important to me personally. I am willing to go, and spend some extra time in the evenings or whenever to make sure this moves forward. It was a really good way to find those people who were really passionate about it and ready to give some extra time on their plates. And the other women who weren't able or didn't feel like they could step forward, they still show great support in making sure that they're attending the events and bringing their team members along.
That's great. Yeah, you know what, I just want to throw out, Emily, I love that, because that's a lot of where I see, as I stepped into Perficient, where we are, right? We've brought some really fabulous, dedicated leaders in to grow our group in what I'll call a more grassroots format, right? Just everyone just kind of rolling up their sleeves and, kind of thinking through what are some of the things that we can do. We get together monthly. We have different topics. So it's been a really good initiative. The question is, what kind of structure do we need to make it even better, right? And continue to grow it. And, I'll defer to Vicki, because I know Vicki at Express Scripts, the structure of the women's group was probably a little more formal.
Yes.
And if you could describe that, I think that is a really helpful angle to look at as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we sort of evolved in our brainstorming to realizing we needed a more formal structure. So I would say, it was an evolution, but it was definitely the right thing to do for our culture and our organization. So we had a president, a vice president. We had, and of course, these were volunteer roles. The first year I was the president. We had an events person, so an events project lead. And then we also had support from various senior leaders who sat on our executive committee to just help us make sure we were thinking big enough, make sure we had the support we needed, make sure we had the financial support that we needed. And then we had a dedicated marketing resource that helped us.
Awesome. Jillian, how are your groups structured?
So we have it's really similar to how our organization is structured. We've mirrored it. So of course it sits under the diversity and inclusion umbrella. And we have a global group, right? And so there's one individual that represents each of these organizations at a global level. And then that person helps steer the satellite groups. So we have satellite groups at all of our offices. So that way, things aren't centric to our San Francisco location. It's kind of a goal for us to make sure that we're, equally distributing resources to all of these ERGs. St. Louis is the second largest location for Square. So because of that membership volume, the resources are allocated accordingly to the ERGs, just really based on membership. So each of the satellite groups, we all have somebody who focuses on mentorship. So there's a mentorship that's dedicated to St. Louis. There's an events group that's dedicated to St. Louis women. And then there's also professional development that's dedicated to St. Louis women. And the professional development mirrors our promotion cycle, which happens twice a year. So we go through all of the cycles of interview prep, how to negotiate your salary, but we do it according to, what our, office, our promotion cycle looks like.
Love that. That is really great. So tell me, as you've stepped into these groups in your various ways of forming and structure, what have been the learnings? Like, what works well? And I will say that we are Perficient as a global organization. We're definitely especially interested in what works well, combining local flavor with, virtual flavor, if you will, right? With that global perspective, because we can't necessarily, well, we can't put everybody in a room together. We certainly can't today, right? But even in general. And so what works well in terms of reach, both locally and broad?
Well, we're reevaluating our structure now with the announcement that we're work from home forever, right? So what we can tell you is that what we're doing right now is, just a lot of this online engagement. We're doing an event where we're doing cook-offs, and because, happy hour is easy to get people together, right? You promise them wine,
Mm-hmm.
we all come in and we chit chat. That's
Yeah.
that's a fun way to make connections outside your group.
Mm-hmm.
We're really struggling with figuring out virtual engagement right now, for our women's group. But there's an opportunity here because we're finding that the virtual engagement doesn't have to be St. Louis centric. And I can now enter events or competitions or trivia nights with, my partners or groups in San Francisco. So I think what worked well 6 months ago clearly is not working well today, but at this point, it's a lot of games. We're doing dance parties, we do yoga. So just stuff to get us not talking about work. That's been working well to get some engagement.
That's great. Vicki, I know Express Scripts has done some pretty creative things. Can you share some of what have been like the bannerific finest moments of the women's group at Express Scripts?
Well, I can tell you what have been the most attended. And surprisingly, it's not the happy hours. So we find that our culture, people really want to hear from senior leadership. And so one of the things that we try to do at least quarterly is have a member of the senior team come speak on a topic to the ERG. And sometimes that topic's a book review. So we try to do book club where we review a book once a quarter as well. And so we've done things like let the ERG make suggestions on what book they would like to read and what senior staff member they would like to have facilitate a discussion on the book. And that was a really big hit. Just having that time to, understand the senior team's perspective and share their perspectives in an intimate way, because even though some of the sites were on the phone, nowadays we have the technology to make it, so much easier. So I would say that is the most popular. Second thing that we quickly formed out of our women's group was a coming back to work for women who were continuing to nurse their children or just had a baby or had a sick child. We continued to hear from I would say from our leaders and from our employees that it was really a cold, hard transition from I had a baby and was home for 10, 12 weeks and boom, I'm at work and there's no support. And we were hearing a lot of, help me. I want to be productive. I want to be successful, but help me. And so we had a team sort of spin off. And that was our second, probably most popular, especially when you look at the age group of our employees. We tend to have a younger age group in our community. Things like nursing mothers' rooms where they could go and pump in between, meetings, special refrigerators that they could store their milk in, connections with other women that they could just talk about going back to work, smaller groups, sort of doing some peer connecting so that they could have that support. Really, really big hit. And we continue to get positive feedback on that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really awesome. And those book clubs were really fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, super fun to, it's the little things, right? Like understanding a favorite book that one of our executives has and, getting them charged up about sharing what they took from the book. And those were really fun. Those were fun times. So Emily, you've stepped into, like all of us, a whole different world with COVID, right? And so what were local events that BJC was able to pull off, right? Because it was, everyone in an area where they could drive to an event. you've now probably had to, reshuffle the deck and really think about how do we take this ERG, online and virtual, because so many things have gone virtual. So, tell me what has transpired. I haven't been there for a few months, but if I know you, there's a lot that's transpired.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that pandemic has really pushed us forward in terms of our virtual capabilities. Even last March before the pandemic really hit, we have a signature event for International Women's Day, which is in early March. And Andrea, you remember, I mean, we had, 400 people packed in the Christian Hospital ballroom having this awesome time together. And then literally 2 weeks later, we're all told, you need to go work from home. There, all this craziness. So it took us a little while, I think, and part of it was just, being in the hospitals, the COVID just knocked everybody sideways. And as we kind of got through the initial wave and learned how to deal with the disease, probably maybe like 2 months ago or so, we're like, okay, we know we're living with this. We know we're in this virtual world, many of us. We just recently announced that those who are working from home will remain working from home until June of 2021. So it's like, okay, we really need to figure out what we're doing. And so we've kind of laid out our plan for the rest of the year. And a lot of it is leveraging teams, so just we're able now to function like a global organization in that sense, where we don't all have to drive to the same Marriott ballroom anymore. We can do things virtually. You mentioned the yoga. We've done that as well. And I couldn't believe how popular it was. And it could not have been any easier to pull together, because a young lady in our team said, you know what, I teach yoga. I'd be glad to do a team session, and did it. And everybody absolutely loved it. So this in September, we are going to do something similar to what Vicki was talking about, having one of our new senior leaders in the organization come. It's kind of an introduction of her and give people a chance to get to know her as a person. And then we have an event lined up, one per month, to get us through the end of the year. And some are a little bit more fun. Like I think our October session is going to be a mindfulness meditation type thing. And then we do the book clubs as well. That's also leading into our November plan. So we're finally, I feel like we're kind of getting back up on our feet and getting things moving for the rest of the year.
Awesome. Tell me about how does your group leverage anything in terms of impact on the community? And probably, that kind of goes to that local, right? So how do we take some of the energy we have in our women's group and use that to help in the communities, whether that's professionally engaging with other women's groups or helping the community in any way? Can anyone lend anything to what your groups have done in that regard?
Sure, I can share what we've done at Express Scripts in the past. So, it's interesting when we do our employee engagement surveys. Giving back to the community is always in the top 3 of what's important to our employees across our enterprise, which is great. But it constantly challenges us to look for opportunities to do things fun and new. And one of the things that we started with our women's ERG was working with the Girls Club, so the Boys and Girls Club specifically, and doing things like teaching, supporting fundraisers for them, going out in the community, helping them get ready for school, whatever they had event they had going on, they would reach out to us and they knew we would support them in whatever way it was, whether it was financially. Most of the time it was resources, people. They need people to go do things. And our women's ERG took on the sponsorship for that, which was a really big hit and continues to be today.
Yeah, I can see that, especially as it relates to women in tech. I can see that for us, with a lot of those girls clubs have specific STEM programs. Yeah, and so the impact we could have in the local communities and those programs could also be, putting my recruiting hat on, could be a phenomenal way to develop a pipeline too. Jillian can probably relate to that.
I have two partnerships that we've created with the St. Louis Women's Group that I'm particularly proud of. First, TEDx, because as I take these two organizations that I'm ingrained with and I try to blend them together, what we've ended up finding is that through TEDx we have access to so many speakers who can come in and speak to different subject areas, right? So for somebody who's really interested in, women of color in the entrepreneurial space, we have people that can come in and, have those conversations with our members, which is so helpful because it just kind of brings new life. It's never the same thing that's being said. It's just a lot of, new ideas that are constantly being generated, which is really what these ERGs tend to be, right? It's a collective think tank of women who don't think like, they think a little bit differently than everybody else. They have content that nobody else can bring to the table. So to inspire them and to engage them to bring new ideas to the table is just massively beneficial for the St. Louis group. But then also another one that I'm really proud of is one that Allison Dietz had gotten me connected with Connections to Success previously. And it's a group in St. Louis. It also works with Dress for Success. So you can donate clothes, right? So any of your professional clothing. But then this group also helps with things like interview prep, resume prep. Now, talent previously, even at Express Scripts, sometimes will support Connections to Success, and the talent teams will go in and, we teach everybody how to interview. But what we ended up finding is that the women's group, they, after all of the prep that we're giving them, right, they're becoming experts in interviews themselves. It's not just recruiters, everybody's got something to give there. So now these women in this women's group that we've completely prepped through professional development are able to use these skills, and now we've got experts, right? And so now they're no longer just learners, they're experts, and they're going out to help the community with what we've taught them.
I love that. And I love the TEDx connection too. That's fabulous. Yeah, really great. Because that's everywhere too. So that's something we can all leverage. Emily, you look like you were going to say something.
Well, yeah, so I love that Jillian was talking about the Dress for Success team through the Connections. Yeah. We've donated to them as well. And, it's so inspiring. You find that the people who want to be involved in these types of employee resource groups, they're really the ones who really care about a lot of things. And it's really been neat to see as we've had different events, and we always have a community component. A lot of times it's just been drive. So we've worked with the St. Louis Area Diaper Bank, and we did a huge diaper drive. The last one we did a period supply drive, because as we learn about different women's issues and things that women struggle with, just to have access to things like that, people have been so generous with their donations and their money. And then also as they learn more about these organizations, to Vicki's point, going out, boots on the ground and helping them out. I think that's really cool.
That's awesome. So really great stuff. And I know that, in some regards, growing membership, it's a word of mouth kind of thing. But, you've done some really phenomenal jobs in growing your memberships. I would like to understand, as you sit here today and you look back on your groups, what hasn't gone well? And I realize we face new challenges today with COVID, but in general, what would you wish that you had done differently as you were growing your ERG?
Well, I'd be glad to go first. I mean, I was reflecting, thinking about this call today, and it just made me smile because we set out thinking that we were going to have to drag people to this ERG. I remember sitting at the table going, gosh, if we could just get 20 people. I mean, at that point in time, we were a big organization, and it went crazy, you guys. We were so unprepared. So for us, I remember setting goals. So, we kicked it off in March, and we thought, well, if by the end of the year we can let's go for a stretch goal. Let's go for 30 people by the end of the year who commit and attend these meetings. We had 100 people in the first 30 days. And so then we were going, oh dear God, what do we, like, we're not prepared for this. Like, should we stop, take it off the web page? Should we stop advertising? Then we're panicking, right? And, we quickly came to our senses and said, no, I mean, we have this many people engaged. We need to ask them to help. So, my lesson in that is it took us too long to ask for help. We kept thinking that, we as the leadership team had to do all the work, and we have all these people showing up to all these meetings who want to do more. That's leadership development for them. Taking on responsibility, even if it's just for an event, allows them to grow their skills. And so I would say what we learned was it took us too long to figure that out. we struggled for a couple months. And once we got our census about us and started thinking more strategically about this group, and I would say being less controlled about, what happened. Not that we, threw it to the wind, but, this group was about people. And so letting the people show up and drive what was important and how that looked like and what our topic should be was the right thing to do. And they were eager, hungry, and wanted to participate. And so once we sort of knocked down those barriers and created an environment where they could be successful and contribute at whatever level it was, it even took off more.
I love that. That's great advice. Thank you, Vicki. How about Jillian?
I was just reflecting on what Vicki was saying. That's really good. That's the information I actually needed today. I'm going to take that home with me. So thank you for that. That's good stuff. I would say something slightly similar, but I think what we didn't do fast enough and what we're just now seeing as a huge benefit was really ingraining it into the onboarding process. It's an HR driven component, and you would think that it would have just been like fully systematized, like in the onboarding process, right? But it wasn't done well enough. But now we're at the point where first day you're learning about our community groups, and you're also learning how to communicate with these community groups because it can feel foreign. Especially in this virtual world, the most important thing that we can do for onboarding is to make sure that our new employees feel some degree of connection. And the best way to do that is really to get them into these employee community groups. And that's what we're doing now. And what we've ended up finding is that even though we're not where we want to be in terms of participation, virtual participation, our membership has skyrocketed because people are looking for, connection. So we're right in this spot. So Vicki, what I heard from you is what I needed. So between these two things, we've got work to do over here. That's
awesome. So do we. It's all good. And Emily, I know certainly there have been some challenges. How has that worked? Tell me about it.
One of the challenges that we're still experiencing, our group has been up and running for a little over 2 years now. And I think when we started this group, we launched it. We had a great response from pretty much all the corporate and the higher level people, which is wonderful because you want leadership support. We saw lots of our, shared service, or what we call shared services. So our HR, IT, supply chain, those types of people jumped on board and were great. Where we've missed the mark and we're continuing to really figure out how to do this is a lot of our team members in the hospitals who, we think about retention, right? People who are engaged in these ERGs have a tighter connection with the organization. And we think about like our housekeeping teams, our food services teams. We have a lot of turnover in those spaces and those types of jobs. And if we could connect with them and make them feel a part of these groups, then it's harder to leave an organization if you feel really, really close to the people and you're meeting new people. So that is a challenge that we've had, is really engaging with every group across BJC Healthcare. And that's one of the things we're continuing to talk about. And we're really trying to place an emphasis on, we have all these, leaders and kind of the more professional level roles. Let's make that a point that my job, Emily, for one event I attend, I need to go find one of my colleagues and make sure they're coming with me. And it's the people who may not feel naturally that, they would want to attend or even could attend. That's another thing, is making sure everybody knows this is for everybody. This is not a leadership program. This is for everyone in our organization.
That's great. That's great advice as well. And you talked about turnover a little bit, and I want to talk about just measuring, right? How do you measure success of a group? There's the number of members on a team site is just one variable. But, Vicki, you talked about earlier, and I told you I was going to circle back. So the time is now. When you looked at your organization and you looked at directors up and the percentage of women leaders, can you share a little from and to, and is that a measurement that you've continued to, to track and trend?
Yes.
And do you attribute your ERG to any of that?
Well, so I can tell you that at the 5-year mark, we had moved to in the 50%. So I think it was like 53%,
wow,
which is significant. I don't know what it is now. It's not, not something that we're currently measuring. Um, and I would say we've tweaked our measurements a little bit, but great success. And a big part of that was, again, getting leaders engaged and understanding, what they needed to help people be successful.
Yeah.
And part of that is just having frank, candid conversations. I remember one time, um, we had a group. What we heard from our women's ERG is, like, we want to talk about the hard stuff. Like, this is all great. You guys are educating us. You're helping us with resumes. You're helping us with, interview. You're helping us with one-on-ones, because we would partner them up. Sometimes it would happen organically, but if not, we would get them a mentor, so that they could start to, think, what's the next for me, right? What do I want? It's okay to, because women tend to take care of everyone else and not themselves. So we wanted each of them to have a plan and help them come up with that. um and part of that, and in helping that was, if they went back to their day job and the person that they reported to didn't support or have the same philosophy, they could lose their inspiration and their drive to do what they wanted to do. And so I would say the company outside of the women's ERG took a more aggressive approach with leadership training. And I think that's what's really helped to contribute, is taking a step back, saying, what do we want our leaders to know as an organization? And because of the work we did in the ERG, we were able to influence the greater enterprise thinking around leadership and what was important and what we were going to make part of our required training and what that would look like. And I think that's, although not measurable, I think that's a big outcome of our women's ERG, and to continue today to get feedback on what's important for our work community and culture, and where do we need to focus our resources and training, skills development, and having frank conversations about, what's impeding folks' success and how can we help them be successful.
Yeah, that's tremendous. So that's really demonstrating, not only is the women's group really helpful for the women that are in the group, right? But look what the influence on the organization is, and what's really helped the organization. That's awesome. You mentioned we have different measurements today. So how do you measure success with your group?
So for a while, we got into more tactical measurements on how many people are part of the ERG and how many people are actively participating, because
Sure.
because so for a while there, we were focusing on number of, people who associated with the ERG, but then you look at the numbers, and less than half of those people were active. So we wanted people to be active, to the earlier point of, this is a retention tool, right? This is how we make sure that people are happy and productive in the jobs they have today. Well, one of the tools we use, and how we get information. And so we started measuring active participation, and what does that look like? And then we started looking at, because we felt like, for a year, about a year and a half, we were doing the same thing every year. We had gotten sort of in a rut where, these things work out really good. Let's do our book club. Let's do Dress for Success. Let's do Girls Club. And so we added on our scorecard something new. Like, let's do something new, big and fun a couple times a year. Not that we don't have to keep doing the things that have been successful, but you need to, have recharge things that get people engaged. And honestly, that's kind of the hard part, is making, because sometimes you have to make decisions. Oh, do I not do this anymore? But it's been
Right.
a hallmark part of what we do, but it conflicts with this, and not everybody agrees. And so that's where you can get into some conflict, and just, you have to focus back on what's the spirit of what we're trying to do here. And again, frank conversations with the members on, eh, what do we value? What are we trying to accomplish? Stay focused on our purpose, and make the best decisions we can. So
That's awesome.
I would say we sort of pivoted to more tactical measurements as opposed to strategic.
How about you, Emily? What have you guys been looking at in terms of measures of success?
So I would say, in addition to what Vicki shared in terms of people being active in the group, one of the things we put in place with our annual engagement survey, or sometimes it's 18 months engagement survey, is we added a question in there: are you a member of a connection group? And if so, please select which ones you were. And it was a demographic question, but it gave us a lot of insight when it came time to slice and dice the data. And our workforce diversity team was able to, have the analysis done that they could see, the 1,000 women who completed the survey, the 400 of them who identified as a women connection, you could see their engagement's a little bit higher than those others who aren't. So it was kind of a first step in doing that, but it was a really interesting way of looking at the data. And I do think we will continue to do that because it gives us a good measurement in terms of not just engagement, but how they're feeling about different things in the organization as well.
Yeah, that's great. I do remember our last engagement survey and being able to slice and dice that those that were members of those connection groups typically had higher engagement scores.
Mhm.
So that was really exciting. Jillian, anything to add as it relates to how you measure success?
Yeah, we actually have a new success measurement that we're pretty proud of on the talent team in partnership with diversity and inclusion is an internal mobility score. So if somebody goes through our women's professional development ERG and they apply to an open role that's open for internal transfer, we can actually track that they've gone through the professional development program and what the outcome of those interviews end up looking like. So we get at least, assuming that we have, they have applied to the role correctly, we get a really good idea of whether or not they're ultimately successful after our program.
That's great.
That is great. So I'm going to pivot for a minute to our audience and to our guests. Before we go, I am going to ask you each to give us some advice as we transition, into an ERG, kind of our next steps at Perficient. But we'll take a minute, whether there's anything, Marissa, as moderator, we have in the chat, or if anyone just wants to unmute and ask a question, give us a couple minutes to do that.
I do have a question. This is Gladys. I'm at Perficient. In the programs in the past, we prepare women to move up and move forward and give them all the tools. In the past, in the companies I've worked with, we don't focus enough on removing roadblocks to allow diversity. A good example that I like to use is, especially for the Salesforce women, they may be a single woman calling an executive out of the blue to say, can I meet with you about sales opportunities? Men's initial reaction is, what is my wife going to think if I meet with a single woman for a beer? And so we presented that to the leadership, and they said, we just started out and say, hey, I'm a single woman. Would you mind going to a beer with me to go talk about some sales opportunities? And they just sat back. And you could tell in their minds, they're thinking about, do we do that? Am I uncomfortable with that? And I said, that's exactly the barrier that you have to remove for your sales team to make your women successful. And when we talk about removing a barrier, they don't understand that removing barriers is their job, as well as preparing the women to step into those roles. So do you have any metrics that you use or programs that you use that you specifically target educating about barriers and how leaders can remove those barriers to open those doors?
I can talk on that a little bit because I think Square does this really well when it comes to transparency. It's one of our core values. Like I was sharing before, we have a group of specifically men who we want to train as allies. We don't have any metrics around the, barrier removal, but truthfully, these ERGs are a source of, change agents, right? So, the women, if given the opportunity, can actually, influence by, through those diversity surveys. For us, it would be through, how do you feel on your team? Questions that would be around, comfort and transparency, but also maybe targeting the decision makers and giving them the idea that there are those barriers. I don't think that anybody, you don't know the barriers that are, presented to people who don't look like you. So specifically targeting men as allies, may help remove those gaps so that you can educate them.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you 100% that as a leader, that's a big part of our job. I don't think of anywhere where we measure that specifically, but I think we do promote transparency. We do promote open, frank, candid dialogue. We do take that serious. We take that information that we get via surveys, or, we tend to do small group discussions, which is where you really get a lot of good information. And, we take that on as leaders and we take it back to the greater organization to solve those issues and then report them back to the employees. It's just part of our culture. And so, I not that it's perfect, but I think with that type of culture, you get that. We about a year ago, we put our president, who's a man, in charge of our women's ERG. He definitely wanted that. He wanted to get closer to better understand the challenges women place in the workforce, and it's been a really good thing. And he still is like, he's dumbfounded at the stuff that he learns that he didn't know, but it helps us to be able to make great big change across the enterprise.
I'd love to see a collective list of barriers that were aha moments to leadership. Because if we can all just tackle the aha moments and remove that barrier, I think that what happens as women is we develop in a company and we keep hitting those barriers. So we move to another company. And, the old saying, you have to go out to go up, is still alive and well with women. And to keep them, we have to really focus on removing those barriers. So I would love to see a list of those barriers with aha moments that we can share with leadership and give them the aha moments.
Gladys, I hear you talking about blind spots, right? So it's not even the barriers, it's the blind spots, the people who don't look or have the lives that we have, they just don't even know. So I love Vicki's suggestion of, those small group conversations, candid conversations, leadership involvement. That's the right way to make organizational change through these ERGs.
I love also, oh, sorry, Emily. I was just going to say, I love also involving your allies in an active role. And so it's not just that they come along, but they have an active role in the group as well. Go ahead, Emily.
Well, and that's along the lines of what I was going to say too. I've been amazed at how much we learn from the different groups that we have. So it's an example with our benefits program and making sure we have benefits that our LGBTQ team members find beneficial to them, because maybe the people making that decision have those blind, they don't know what you don't know. So we've made an intentional effort. Okay, well, let's sit down with that group and just talk about what is it that would work best for you in your situation. What would you like to see? And we've done that with a lot of our different groups as well. And it's really been great learning across the organization. Because getting back to your point, if you don't look like that person, you don't live that person's experience, you just don't know.
That's awesome. So I'm going to be very sensitive to time because we all have busy lives. And I'd love to step into asking you for advice. Remembering that at Perficient, we have really grown nicely, grassroots. We have some leaders that are on this call that I have to call out that have done a tremendous job really making women in tech a dot on the map at Perficient. And we're at this place where, we want to grow. We want to take it to its next level. And we would love to hear any advice that you would have as it relates to, taking your organization that, is growing, just by virtue of what it is, but then how can we be intentional? What's the advice to help us take it to the next level? And I'll start with Jillian.
That was a tough one. I was hoping you were going to call me last on that. I'm gonna tie it back to what I was saying earlier, is just making sure that your ERG has some degree of influence every step of the way, through, onboarding all throughout the employee life cycle. There's so many pieces that, that we skipped, that we found, that ERGs want to be involved in talent. ERGs want to know about the benefits. ERGs want to know about, the promotions and, so just involving them in those conversations and asking them before they have to ask you. So just letting them feel the degree of influence, I think not only does that help the organization, but it helps the members of the ERG feel like they are making an impact, and it's likely to impact engagement too.
Great. How about Emily?
I would say the best piece of advice is as you grow your group, it's going to grow through word of mouth. And as each member has a good experience, they're going to go back and tell their colleagues. And we've seen that happen in our organization as well. And I thought about this ahead of time because I was thinking, what would be the best piece of advice? And I think about the feedback that we get from some of our larger events, and where we get the best feedback is when we are showcasing our leaders and they're not talking about work. They're talking about their own personal journey. And the feedback is, wow, so-and-so is actually a real person. That was so cool to get to know her and her challenges, and knowing that she also was a single mom. I didn't know that. And she was able to grow her career and become this big leader while raising these little kids and dealing with divorce and all of that stuff. It's unbelievable how far just sharing those authentic stories and positioning especially your leadership team as real people, has made a big difference.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Vicki.
I was going to say, both Emily and Jillian, I agree with what both of you said. And down that line, when I think back to kicking off our ERGs as an organization, we had things we wanted to accomplish. So we were looking at it through our perspective. What do we want? We want more women in leadership positions, right? We had certain things that we wanted to accomplish. I think it took us too long to pause and say, what's the why for the membership? Why are these people coming to this meeting? What do they need? What is it that they want? What am I not thinking of? Barriers, to Gladys's point. Each person that shows up in your ERG has their own life experiences. They have things going on at home. They have things going on at work. They're in that meeting because they need something. And are we able to help them with that need? Are we too focused on what we want to accomplish? And so I would say, don't lose sight of that. And you can get that information back in a lot of ways, but don't lose sight of there are people counting on you that are showing up that have a need that's not being met somewhere else.
Tremendous. That's great. Yeah. Wow, you guys are awesome. And I knew that ahead of time. And I'm so excited that I had an opportunity to share your awesomeness with everybody at Perficient. We are building something fabulous, and you've helped us with that inspiration and that aspiration for where our Women in Tech group goes. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to spend the time with us. I can't thank you enough for it, and tons of learning. I hope you are able to take some pearls away as well from the other panelists. So it's a win-win, and it's a wrap. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.